excited to be here with you today to share my vision of popcorn stories. How many of you have ever been to a church or a funeral where they did popcorn testimonies? Where random people would just pop up and tell a little bit about the person who had passed away. That's kind of what I envision popcorn stories to be, where caregivers learn their residents' stories, and by learning their stories, they can pop up at any time to help them, to comfort them, to make them smile, to redirect them. I think popcorn stories can play a very important part in long-term care. Popcorn stories. Learn them, know them, share them. By doing that, you're developing relationships with your residents as a caregiver. You're developing relationships. It's got to be two-way. I share with you, you share with me. If it's just one way, if it's me pulling all the stories, there's no trust being developed because I'm not sharing. So you have to do both. It has to be two-way. Share, back and forth. I'm going to give you my first story of how I came to be involved with popcorn stories. As you already know, I was a CNA in long-term care. The last 10 years were at the Missouri Veterans Home in Warrensburg, where I took care of America's heroes. This particular gentleman came in on the day that I was off. So the next day I come to work and they said, Donna, we have a new resident. His name is Steve, and you'll be taking care of him today. And I was also the med tech that day. So I went down to Steve's room and I knocked on the door and I waited for him to invite me in. And as soon as I got in there, he says, who are you? Before I could say anything. I said, I'm Donna. I'm the med tech today and I'm going to give you your medicine. Are you a nurse? I said, no, I'm a CNA and a med tech. Part of the time I'll be helping you with your cares and part of the time I'll be helping you with your medicine. Who told you to give me that? Do you know what you're giving me? And I thought, he sounds like Dragnet. I mean, this is what I was hearing. Who are you? What do you want? Who told you to give me that? Just like Dragnet. And I looked at him and I smiled and I said, you know what? You sound like Dragnet, and I think I'm going to nickname you Dragnet. And he looked at me and he smiled and he nodded. And so I said to him, I'm taking it from that smile and that nod that me calling you Dragnet is okay. Is that right? And he smiled a little bit bigger and he nodded. And so our relationship began. Dragnet and me. Dragnet was with us for about 6 months. I knew that he liked a cup of hot coffee and newspapers first thing in the morning. He got newspapers from several different states. So when I would go to the work in the morning, the first thing I would do is go to the kitchen, get a nice big cup of hot coffee, fix it just the way he liked it. I would stop at the nurse's station, I would pick up those newspapers, and I would take them to his room. And I would go in and, hey, Dragnet, it's a beautiful morning. I've got your newspapers and your coffee. And that's how my day began. Almost every day, I interacted with Dragnet as either his caregiver or his med tech. I knew that he hated noise and hated clutter even more. I knew that he liked to sit in his recliner after lunch. I knew those kinds of things to take care of him. And then he died. He was only with us for 6 months. My husband's a funeral director, and he worked at the funeral home that come to pick Dragnet up. And that night I told him, I said, you know the guy you got from the veterans home today? And he said, yeah. And I said, remember when I told you about the guy I nicknamed Dragnet? He said, yeah. I said, that's Dragnet. He said, really? And then a couple days later, I'm coming home from work and he calls me and he says, Donna, you got to come to Dragnet's visitation. I said, really? He said, yeah, it's going to be one of the most interesting visitations I've ever done. And probably never have another one like it. And I thought, what in the world? And I says, what's so interesting about it or so special about it? He said, you just need to come. So I went home and I got ready and I went back into town for Dragnet's visitation. I walked in and there were these boards all over. And on these boards were medals and ribbons and certificates and pictures and newspaper articles. Oh my gosh, there was newspaper articles plastered everywhere. And I began to tear up. And I read a little bit more. And by the way, there was these men standing across this wall, against this wall. And they all had on these dark black suits, almost exactly alike. And there were even a few that were Dragnet's age. And they kind of looked like him. And I thought, that's just kind of creepy over there. So I come back over and I get into the clippings and I start reading. And as I told you, I started tearing up. And then all of a sudden I found myself reaching for a Kleenex because I was crying. I was crying because I didn't know this man. Dragnet was FBI. So when I nicknamed him Dragnet, boy, did I hit the nail on the head, right? He was FBI. And you know what? He was instrumental in cracking one of the biggest civil rights cases in this nation's history. It was Mississippi burning. For those of you who don't know or don't remember, Mississippi burning was where 3 young college students got involved with civil rights and protest in the whole movement to make this world a better place. And they disappeared. And when they found them, they were murdered. And Dragnet was instrumental in cracking that case. What kind of caregiver was I? I didn't know this. I could call myself, how could I call myself a good caregiver when something like this I had no idea of? How could I call myself a good caregiver? How could I call myself a lead CNA? Because I didn't take the time to learn his stories. And I made a vow right there that day, no more. This isn't happening again. I'm going to learn my residents' stories. When I go to work tomorrow, I'm going to start learning their stories, and I'm going to learn every one. I'm going to learn stories from each one. And so I went to work next day, and it started. I just started asking questions. Where were you born? Maybe it's someplace I wanted to go. Maybe it's someplace I've been. Maybe it's someplace I've never heard of, but it struck up conversation. If they were married, how they met their spouse. Anything I could think of. And then I started looking around their rooms and noticing things that were giving me clues. I mean, think about it. When somebody goes to long-term care, there's precious few things they can take with them, right? They're not able to bring very much. So what they do bring means something to them. If it means something to them, there's a story, and I'm going to learn it. Look at the pictures on the wall. Ask them about those pictures. Ask them where they were taken. Ask them what was going on at that time. Knickknacks, art things, they meant something to them. There is a story there. Here's another one. Jack. Jack was the type of resident that nobody wanted to call their favorite. Jack was very angry. Jack was very bitter. And so nobody really wanted to take care of Jack. He was very difficult to take care of. And one day I went into Jack's room and I noticed there was a drawing of a horse on a paper sack sitting on the nightstand. And I said, Jack, who drew this? He said, I did. I was, really? This is really good. I'm very impressed. He said, I did those up there too. All those, I did those. They were needlepoint that he had done and had framed, and most of them were of horses. So Jack likes horses, right? He also likes needlepoint. He asked me, he says, get in that drawer over there. There's this wooden thing that looks kind of like a rattle. Would you get that for me? So I got in there and I found it and I thought, I've seen this before. I'm not sure what it is. This. And I took it over to him and he says, do you know what this is? And then it dawned on me. I said, I do. My grandmother had one and she used it for darning socks. And he smiled. And he said, good job. I didn't think you would know that. It was the first time I saw Jack smile. And I looked at him and I said, I should introduce you to my grandmother, because you know what? She is full of piss and vinegar. And he just busted out laughing. He laughed so hard. And he looked at me and he said, I haven't heard that phrase in ages. And then he looked at me and he said, I haven't laughed like that in a long time either. And I walked over and I put my hand on his shoulder and I said, Jack, I bet your mom is very proud of you. And he said, I wouldn't know. She died when I was just a toddler. And I was a pass-around kid. I said, a pass-around kid? What's a pass-around kid? He said, you get passed around from family member to family member, from neighbor to neighbor. Another mouth to feed is a very hard thing to do in those times. And I thought, oh my gosh, no wonder this man is angry. And he said, I rode the orphan train. I knew what the orphan train was because about a year or two before I read a book about the orphan train. I was like, oh my gosh, Jack, I know about the orphan train. You rode the orphan train? He said, I did, for a very long time. I said, really? He said, I did. When people come to the orphan train, to the station to get an orphan, they know if they want a boy, they know if they want a girl, they know how old they want them to be, but nobody wants an angry kid. And I was an angry kid. And I thought, bless his heart, he's still on that train. He's still angry. But why wouldn't he be? When you come to long-term care, when he came to long-term care, why did he come? Because there was nobody to take care of him. He was back on that orphan train. I left his room and I went to the nurse's station and I said, y'all, Jack's going to be my new favorite. And they all just broke out laughing. They were like, yeah, right. What kind of joke are you playing on us? I said, no, seriously, Jack's going to be my new favorite. And I told them Jack's story. And a couple of them teared up and I was like, I know. Everybody's always talking about how hard it is to take care of Jack, but my gosh, look at what he's been through. I said, and he loves to draw. So I'm going to the activities department and I'm going to get art supplies and put them in his room. And y'all, when you go in there, talk about horses. He loves horses. And all that needlework on his walls, he did it. And they're all like, you learned that in just a few minutes in his room? And I said, yeah, it's his story. Learn their stories. It will help you take better care of them. I've got one more I'm going to tell you about, Alan. Alan had progressed in the disease process, and he didn't communicate very much. When he did speak, he was very soft-spoken, and he was kind of a charmer. He'd wink at you and call you Sugarfoot. But then when you went to do his cares, he came up swinging. And he would start yelling out numbers and alphabet, letters. And I told the girls, there's something with these numbers and this alphabet. What in the world could it be? It means something. And if we can figure out what it means, we can come up with a plan. And I thought, I'm going to call my dad. So I called my dad, who's a retired Navy SEAL, and I told him what we were going through. And I said, part of the time he's very gentle, but then when we get ready to do cares, I said, this is what he says, because I wrote them down. And I started calling them out just the way Alan did. And I said, do you know what that might be? And Dad said, yeah, I know exactly what it is. And I said, what is it? He says, he's yelling out bomb coordinates. I'm like, bomb coordinates? Alan must have been really threatened when we were in there doing cares. And then I remembered talking to his wife And I said, I bet Jack, or Alan, was like a Southern gentleman, the old Southern gentleman. And she looked at me and she said, he really was. She said, he was an officer. And the officers' wives would have these teas. And they loved for Alan to come to the teas because he was such a charmer. And so the next time that we were taking care of Alan, and he came up swinging and yelling out those numbers and those letters, I said, hey, guess what? We're getting you ready. The officers' wives are having a tea. And you know how much they love for you to be there. They are looking so forward to you being there and talking with them. I've got your dress uniform over here. We're just going to get you cleaned up, get that uniform on, and get ready to go meet them. He says, I do like those officers' wives. And I said, I know you do. And do you know, he calmed right down. He let us get him cleaned up and put that put his clothes on him, which he thought was his dress uniform, to get ready to go to the officers' tea. Knowing their stories is so, so important. I've explained to you how it worked for me in developing relationships with them, developing relationships with their family. I've told you how it helps to comfort them, to make them happy, to bring back those memories, and to redirect them. It makes your work easier. But it's so very important to know their stories, because every time you tell one of their stories, they live on. It's up to us to help them live on. So think about it. We've got several hundred people here today. I've told you 3 stories. If everybody told somebody one of those stories, look at how many times we brought that hero back. We helped him to live on. So here's my challenge. Go back to your facilities. Learn your residents' stories. Learn them. Know them. Share them with your coworkers so that they can do the same thing, so that they can have the same results as you. Teach them to do what you're doing. And then share those stories so that they can live on through us. You've been an amazing audience. It's been a privilege to be here and share popcorn stories, and I can't wait for the emails.